Hello and welcome to the Quest for Significance podcast. It's based on, related to a book called The Quest for Significance, Harnessing the Need That Makes the World Go Round. I had the honor of co-authoring that with the man who's now taking a sip of his coffee or tea, Dr. Arie Kruglanski, Distinguished University Professor at the University of Maryland, one of the world's experts on human motivation. In this podcast, we have a guest, Aaron David Miller. A lot of you may know that name from the news, always spoken about as a foreign affairs expert, longtime U.S. mediator in the Middle East, but also an expert on American presidents. He wrote a book about them. We'll get into that in just a second. Aria, considering that we have a guest, Aaron David Miller, who knows about American presidents, obviously quested for significance, and then also has searched for peace in the Middle East with all kinds of characters and the clash of interests. How do you think that overlaps with our work on the human need for significance?
Both themes resonate very much with the quest for significance. The relation between a president and the people is one of significance. The president lends significance to the people, promises significance to the people, whether through economic welfare or through political influence, world influence. So the relationship between presidents and the followers is one of significance, I feel. It's pretty much like a relationship between lovers. Lovers give each other significance by virtue of their being themselves respected. So the significance trickles from the respectability of the agent to the respectability of the recipient. And a leader that loves the people by dint of there being the president being an important person, lends importance to the people. And I think, that's, by the way, the reason why when people feel uncertain about themselves, when they feel left behind, when they feel anxious, they seek a president of great power and prestige to give them that significance. And I think that's a recipe for populism from the times of Julius Caesar to the times of Trump. And it is a relation of significance. As far as the Middle East and foreign relations are concerned, significance, as Aaron Miller has pointed out, is very important in terms of the hegemony that a country wants to claim in an international system. That's the reason why Putin engaged in a war on Ukraine. That's why Hitler tried to avenge the debacle, the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty. That's, by the way, why the Israelis and Palestinians are fighting over the piece of land. It's not the land, in my opinion. It's not the material aspect of the land. It's about sovereignty, about being a nation among nations, being recognized. So I think both matters that Aaron Miller is so deeply engaged in have a very strong tie to the quest for significance.
Well, indeed, in our book, The Quest for Significance, we often spoke about interpersonal relations. Like you could even use our book to understand that since the cave dwellers all the way through Julius Caesar and dictators and up to today, people, your neighbors, your workmates, they all are questing for significance. They want their lives to matter. They want some dignity and respect. And we write about how if you can figure that out for yourself, what's important to you and what's important to the people around you, it probably can be a win-win, kind of inspired by Dale Carnegie's book about winning friends and influencing people. We're trying to follow up that theme. Speaking of Carnegie, here's a scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron David Miller, you're our guest. Welcome very much, of course, to the Quest for Significance podcast. So as you heard from Arie Kruglanski, we're fascinated by your work about presidents and your work as a Middle East mediator, now an observer of world affairs. Let's talk about presidents first, because you wrote a book called The End of Greatness, Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. And we note that it was published in 2014. The next three elections brought us Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. But Trump's slogan, it's on his hat, right? Make America great again. That's the word you went for, great. So depends what you mean by great, I suppose. Just spin for us, especially considering what Americans were looking for in order to feel good about themselves and our country. This search for a kind of wonderful president, if not a great one. Go ahead.
First of all, thanks, Arie, and thanks, Dan, for having me. It's a fascinating conceit, the notion of significance. Yeah, maybe we can return to that later, but it's clearly something that's impressed me, along with my own search for a meaningful life. To live a significant one, I think, is important as well. You know, if Freud said that the two things that matter most in life are work and love, I don't know whether he put them in that order or not. Both love and work, I think, define individuals, but you need meaning and maybe significance in both to be fulfilled. Well, greatness in the presidency, it's an elusive concept. I argue basically Americans have had three undeniably great presidents, one in each century: Washington in the 18th, Franklin Roosevelt in the 19th, Lincoln in the 19th, and Franklin Roosevelt in the 20th. And what links them all together are what I define as the three C's of greatness in the presidency. First is crisis. Crisis is it describes a set of circumstances, not a personal quality or a trait, but it sets the stage for greatness, because the founders, in their infinite wisdom, I think back over the last 3 months and wonder whether the founders were all that successful. Founders created a system which was an open invitation to struggle. Three branches of government, shared and separated powers, really driven by one overriding preoccupation. For them, it was to control the power of the royal governors and the king. But in a more abstract manner, it was to control the emergence of any individual who sought to gain and aggrandize power. They thought that they had created a system, not perfect in that respect, that minimized the chances of a demagogue, of a populist emerging. Crisis opens the door to greatness in the presidency, because it is the only thing that affords a president this sort of opportunity to demonstrate the other two elements of presidential greatness. The second is character. Character, both internally, ascribed into a set of moral and ethical principles, but also a president as a character in a play to relate to the public. And both elements of character are critically important for success. And the final C is capacity. How to get things done, how to rely on people who know how to get things done. And it's no coincidence that our three greatest presidents had, inarguably, I would argue, the three greatest cabinets and sets of advisors to advise them to help overcome those crises. So you have crisis opens the door, character and capacity allows the president to walk through the door and to manage the crisis in a way that leaves the nation, this republic, stronger and richer in the process. And I would argue that the three greatest crises the nation faced was the crisis of its early years, civil war, which is the greatest crisis that any nation faces, and finally, an economic depression of wrenching character and the defeat of fascism. Washington, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. Crisis opened the door, their own character and capacity allowed them to walk through it, and they remain, according to historians, journalists, and most Americans, undeniably great presidents. So again, I think part of the problem, I argued, and the book did not do well because I don't think Americans were prepared to accept the basic conceit, which is we're not going to have great presidents again because we don't want crisis to open the door to that greatness. And as a consequence, we don't want great presidents. We want good presidents. And I define good not in the banal sense, but good in the sense that they are good at what they do, they're competent, Good in the sense that they are good because morally and ethically, they ascribe to a set of values that allows them to turn the M in me upside down, so it becomes a W in we. And unless an American president goals, values, objectives are tethered to some broader set of concerns and objectives that are broader than the president's own desires and ambitions, that's a failed presidency. And I think we are clearly witnessing right now a president, an American president, only the second president to gain election in 2 non-consecutive terms, but a president who seems to have an inability to turn that M in me upside down so it is a W in we. A president whose domestic policies and foreign policies seem to be subordinated. And again, I should add, by the way, Dan and Arie, that I've worked for Republicans and Democrats, and I voted for Republicans and Democrats. This is not a partisan comment, it's an observation. Seems to have subordinated the nation's interest to his own vanities, his grievances, his financial interests, and his politics. And that 3 months in is proving to be a very concerning, if not dangerous, event. And I fear it is not just a headline, I think it is a trend line.
Aaron, I'm inspired to say, thinking especially of 2 of the C's of your book, The End of Greatness, that President Trump claims at least that he's extremely capable and is the best negotiator and the best at business and making this country rich. And the other C would be the crisis, in which he obviously generates crises and seems to feed off them, perhaps realizing that the American people will want somebody to solve them. A little pause for the master social psychologist, Arie Kruglanski. From the themes that you heard that Aaron's been thinking about, the 3 great presidents, Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and the nature of today's president, what do you think from a significance point of view?
Well, first of all, I agree with Aaron's assessment of the 3 presidents. Indeed, they were great historical figures. And I also would like to draw a distinction between what America needs and what the Americans want. I think in an objective historical perspective, America needs a great president right now. We are in a situation of crisis, constitutional crisis. Our democracy seems to be sinking to unprecedented depths. This is the time for a great president to mend our declining system. But I think that Americans do not really want that. America wants somebody who is promising them greatness, promising them economic welfare, promising them the pride of being a nation that is respected and admired around the world. So they want to believe that a president like Trump, at least those who voted for him, is willing and able to deliver that. From the historical perspective, from the objective perspective that Aaron, as a historian, as a commentator, adopts, Trump is doing none of that. But I think Trump managed to convince his voters that he is actually going to deliver on all these promises and make America and Americans great again.
And Arie, to some extent, that comes from a loss of significance, at least as perceived by a lot of American citizens, as though they've been losers in the last 10 or 20 years?
Yes, I think that there are several events along the last several decades created a sense of insecurity, uncertainty, not only in America, but in the world at large. The globalization that left many behind, the financial crisis of 2008, the pandemic, the immigration crisis, all that left many unmoored and untethered, feeling that their significance is shattered. Working class Americans in the 70s, there is research showing that they believe all that they are members of the middle class. Right now, that perception, research shows, has plummeted considerably and very significantly. So there's a sense of betrayal. There's a sense that something is not working. And I think that led to the kind of support for somebody who is promising to bring everything back again, to identifying the supposed enemies, whether it be Democrats or whether it be immigrants or it be Muslims or whoever, and mobilizing the people against that. And that is a sure fire formula to get political influence, because that promises both security and significance to the voters. And, that's what we see, I think, is happening.
Aaron, unless you're itching to make a comment, I'm going to shift soon to your Middle East career. Go ahead.
Right. I just actually two things. I think, Arie, I mean, that's a profound point, and I think it's been recognized even by Democrats who need to take a very long look in the mirror to understand what is the nature, what is the appeal of Trump's attraction. And I guess a segue into the Middle East would be, I remember well I cannot remember which Palestinian it was in the early 80s, said to me, I asked him, why do you support Yasser Arafat? And the answer was so pregnant with meaning. He said, Arafat is a stone that I throw at the Israelis every day. And the reality is there is the transition. Donald Trump is in effect for many Americans, a stone that they throw at the elites, at the one percenters. And the paradox, the irony, of course, is Donald Trump and the men and women he has employed, many of them are well-educated from the nation's most elite universities, Harvard, Yale, J.D. Vance. They are members of the 1%. And yet, they have, I think, tapped into this notion, this fundamentally anti-elitist notion that has proved so resonant in attracting Trump voters. We should point out, though, remember, this is not a broad mandate, 2024. Trump's popular vote, the first Republican president to win the popular vote since 2004, is the third narrowest margin since the late 19th century. So we're not talking about an entire nation that is now somehow caught up in Trump and Trumpism. But nonetheless, in our political system, he's tapped into a vulnerability and significance, the feeling of insignificance that I think affects many Americans, the loss of hope, the loss of jobs, the threat posed by the browning and blacking of America. There's a racist underpinning, to say the least, about Trump's message. But it does get to one critically important issue of significance. And I want to just quote a line, which again, Jack Kennedy loved, out of Henry IV, Shakespeare, the Bard. One character says to the other, I can summon the spirits from the vasty deep. And the other man replies, but so can any man. The question is, do they come when you call? And that issue of leadership relating to significance and insignificance, I think is critically important. A talented, great human can use significance to empower and to lead in a way that Donald Trump has not. He's played to fear. He's played to feelings of insignificance, where presidents, great ones, make people feel good. They instill people with hope and with significance. And I think that's critically important. I want to thank you again, Dan and Arie, for helping me clarify my own thinking on this, because I think it's really, really, really important what you're doing.
Let's talk about the Middle East, because we have this unique opportunity with you. You worked in the State Department, as you said, under presidents of both parties, 1978 to 2003. I think you've admitted publicly there there were a lot of frustrations, especially when we talk about Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts. You wrote a book about that called The Much Too Promised Land, America's Elusive Search for Arab-Israeli Peace. That was published in 2008. So let's not talk about the Middle East, whether things are better or worse, but maybe one thing that's the same is leaders, human beings, decision makers, right? You probably had to consider and listen to what would give each side a sense of significance, give them a win, give them dignity. Is that what's in a mediator's mind almost all the time?
I mean, I often thought we needed to employ the last serious effort to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which was 25 years ago this July, Camp David. I think we needed I think psychiatrists more than mediators, because this notion of significance, of meaning, of respect, of dignity, I think is critically important to this. And when in fact negotiations have succeeded, they've succeeded because you had strong leaders who were masters of their politics, not prisoners of their identities, of their ideologies, but they were leaders who were able to convey to the other a degree of respect and significance, whether it was Sadat and Begin, whether it was King Hussein and Rabin, and even in perhaps in the most complicated relationship between Arafat and Rabin, I heard from both men this notion that they respected one another. Rabin respected Arafat because Rabin knew he had many views of Arafat. Many were not complementary, but he knew that Arafat had taken hard decisions to do Oslo. And I heard from Arafat many, many times, particularly after Rabin's murder, that he had lost a partner who had made him feel and who had respected him. So I think that's critically important in a negotiation, whether or not, and clearly, when the negotiation succeeds and meets the mutual needs and requirements of each side, dignity, significance, and respect comes along with that, because leaders are not signing up to agreements that fundamentally undermine their capacity to convince their respective publics that they are in fact getting their needs met. And dignity and respect is critically important. The Egyptian-Israeli peace process and peace treaty survived principally because it met both Israeli and Egyptian needs. Oslo did not survive because it was impossible to maintain a set of relationships when one party was an occupier and the other was occupied. And the dance between occupier and occupied, and the perversions that strange dance and embrace created, doomed the process. And I might add, both parties, Israelis and Palestinians, bear responsibility for it. But clearly, in an asymmetry of power, it is the Palestinians that felt the meaning of insignificance, of powerlessness, and of humiliation.
Arie, you've written about that too, yes.
Yes, I wanted to connect to Aaron's previous point, which relates to this issue as well, and that is alternatives, ways, means of gaining significance. And I think that we are up against a very difficult problem in the sense that fear and aggression is a particularly aggression against the enemy that instills the fear is a particularly dominant primordial way of attaining significance. And it's very difficult to compete with that with more optimistic, pro-social, constructive ways. It's just a kind of an impulse that immediately arouses when you feel humiliated. You want to fight. And I think that mobilization of the nations to fight on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side had such a resonance on both sides of this issue. And I think that's why it would have been so important to defeat Hamas, because to prove to the Palestinians that the violent ways does not bring significance, that it brings ignominy, that it brings shame. But after that, in victory, magnanimity, the Churchillian maxim implemented by the Marshall Plan in Europe, the way America reacted to the defeat of its enemies, that would have been essential for the Israeli and Palestinians to be able to bring a peaceful solution to exist. If that were, because all instances, I've studied terrorism. I was a co-director of the research center for the study of terrorism and response to terrorism at University of Maryland. And all cases of people abandoning violence were when violence did not pay. Because it's otherwise it's a particularly primordial and appealing route to significance. And we've seen that in terror organization in Egypt, Al Jihad and Gamma Islamiyah. We've seen it in Sri Lanka, the defeat of the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam that finally got deradicalized. And we've done research that proves how they were reintegrated into society, but only after there was a decisive defeat by the Sri Lankan forces. So it's very difficult to convince people to abandon violence and consider peace. The Egyptians are mentioned, the peace accords with Egypt, but this happened after the Egyptians' great success of crossing the canal, and they celebrated it. They have a whole museum devoted on the way from the airport to Cairo, devoted to their great success in the Yom Kippur War. The Oslo Agreement also became possible after the Intifada. The first Intifada proved to the Palestinians that they can, really have a considerable impact, and the Israelis cannot very easily control them. So I think this building of significance is the way of showing that maybe there is another way when violence is proven ineffectual.
Well, Aaron, why don't you button it up? I mean, there are a lot of themes there.
No, I think
Take a couple of minutes.
No, I think it's a very important point. And what Arie says about the way in which progress in Arab-Israeli peacemaking has occurred, almost without exception, the great breakthroughs, with the exception of the Abraham Accords, which were out of conflict zone set of agreements motivated by an entirely different set of propositions. The three great breakthroughs, Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Israel, Palestinians, were all preceded, without exception, by war, terror, and insurgency. But the pain, which was critically important to shake up the status quo, had to be accompanied by the gain. And the gain is inextricably linked to significance. It is the prospect of actually not just returning to the status quo, but gaining something anchored in respect, respectability, and the end of conflict, national pride and honor, which worked in the case of Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, but could not work in the case of Israelis and Palestinians, and will not work until both Israelis and Palestinians come to this fundamental realization that, in effect, their mutual needs and requirements need to be fulfilled. And part of those mutual needs and requirements have nothing to do with territory, have a lot to do with historical trauma and addressing historical trauma through, I think, a link to real significance, respect, and dignity. And that has been missing, and unfortunately is absent now as we watch we watch one of the lowest points over the last 15 months in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship play out.
Aaron, just take one more minute, because I have a feeling that as a person who's on the Washington, D.C. scene, former government official, now a scholar, some think tank experience, significance. Everyone marches around Washington, D.C. asking each other, hey, what do you do? What do you think if people were more aware and maybe give some significance to others? We might get along better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it requires a balance. I would argue that the key to basic human kindness and understanding that life is not just about the me, but it has to be tethered to the we. I would argue, in my case, frankly, to be very personal, flowed from having an extraordinary woman as a mother, who I think understood so much about unhappiness, but how to become happy. And it was I think in the end, it's the combination between the lessons that both of my parents imparted on me to try to leave the world a better place than when I found it, how to think in terms of the we, not just the me. Meaning is fine, internally generated, it's important, but in order to make that impact, I think you have to do two things. You have to recognize what is a significant contribution, and in order to achieve it, to lead and to, I think, be fulfilled, you have to lend to others the same kind of significance that you feel as a consequence of your background or your success in life. So it's making others feel important and significant that is critically important, I think, to a better world. And I fear that in Washington, that road only runs one way. It's the me and I'm significance. You know the old saw, it's not enough that I succeed. It's important that my friend fail. That proposition, I worry, is still too much alive and well in this city. And I want to thank you and Arie for not only having me on, but I think finding this conceit, this extraordinary notion of significance, and making it real in the interviews that you're doing. I think you're lending a huge service, huge service. And I'm already a fan. Haven't read the book, hasn't come out yet, but I will for sure.
So much, Aaron.
And I'll recommend others read it as well.
Thank you, Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace here in Washington, D.C. As you hear, a very special place, but I don't mean that in an entirely positive way. Over my shoulder, you see the book cover of what Arie Kruglanski and I have written. It's called The Quest for Significance, Harnessing the Need That Makes the World Go Round. Hope you find the book and hope you find these podcasts interesting. Thank you, Arie, as always. Thank you, Aaron David Miller.
Thank you very much indeed.